So hopefully you can't hear the laundry in the background, but that's just what adulting is all about, is doing how many things at the same time and hoping nobody notices they're happening at the exact same time. Waylon, I got a fun topic for today, but before we get to the topic today, we want to make sure folks like the video, comment below, and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, we're just talking to ourselves. And while we don't mind talking to ourselves, I feel like that's kind of weird to post yourself talking about yourself if nobody's actually watching. So today we want to talk about a person that wants to build an agency. What do you think about that topic today?
Yeah, that's great. Hopefully we can provide some value on what that looks like, what the positives, the negatives are, just kind of an overall view.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a buzzword too. I know one of the largest IMOs, whatever words we want to use, uses the phrase sell, build, recruit. Like sell is less of a priority than the build and the recruit part. So it's a pretty popular conversation. Hopefully it connects with somebody today. Let's start off by figuring out, when do you think somebody is ready to start replicating themselves into other people?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a hard line on this, but the one factor that I consider to be pretty important is don't build until you know what you're doing. That sounds super subjective because it is. Some people will catch on more quickly. Some people learn the ropes in the business a little more quickly. However, I don't think it's fair for you to recruit, bring someone else on to build a career when you don't even know what you're doing yet. And I don't mean know what you're doing as far as like you can log into your iPad or pull up a training video and send it to someone. Like know what you're doing as in I can buy leads, I can work a certain schedule, and I can make X amount of dollars almost on repeat every single week, every single month. That's what know what you're doing means. Not like, hey, I can send videos to people and I know what I'm doing. No, you don't still. I promise you don't.
Yeah, I think it's tough because a lot of IMOs try to promote the fact that you should be recruiting your friends, family, cousins, brothers, uncles, and the person that drove you to the airport in the Uber on the way to their convention. But they're doing that because they recognize that 92% of agents fail. Maybe that person is going to fail, but they'll recruit someone who doesn't fail. And it's just a law of attrition in those situations mostly, right?
Exactly. I mean, again, it's a double-edged sword. One side of the conversation is, should you eventually do that? Sure. Because again, the opportunity is great and our career is amazing. But before you even know what you're doing to do that is essentially just ignorance. And it just long-term, all it really can do for our next discussion, it can really create debt, create long-term issues that are way bigger than just you not having success as an insurance agent.
Yeah, our next video that we're going to film and then probably get posted a week later is how to deal with chargebacks. And chargebacks can result in roll-up, and roll-up can be quite a burden to bear if you're not properly prepared for it. What would you say is a good way for you to say to yourself, yeah, I understand how to give a presentation. I understand how to log into my e-app and to write business, but financially, when do I have enough money saved up to start replicating myself into others?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a phenomenal question. As the economy changes, that number seems to be rising pretty rapidly because life costs more money now. But, you know, when I got my first downline agent, I had 7 grand in the bank. Now, again, this is coming from someone who had like $12 at the end of each month in the bank. So that was all from personal production. I had that, and I didn't blow through it on my first couple of agents, but I definitely spent a lot more than I expected to. You know, I'm spending $400, $500, $600 in a week to throw gas money at somebody and say, hey, keep going. I know it seems like this is the worst job in the world right now because you couldn't sell anything to anyone, but here's $50 and here's $50 for lunch and dinner, doing all kinds of things like that to make sure that they continue to try, because eventually in this, that's kind of the whole thing. You just keep showing up and eventually you're like, I kind of got this figured out now. And it costs money to support someone to do that.
Yeah, I think the tough part, you kind of counter punch that too, is you can't want it for somebody more than they want it for themselves. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you really, really, really freaking want it for somebody who really doesn't want to put in all the effort necessary in the beginning.
Yep, 100%. Yeah, it's most definitely, double-sided. You can send $50 to somebody for gas, and they could just use that gas to get themselves home and for the rest of the week to go find a new job. I've done that before. Been there, done that, but it's not always perfect. But the overarching theme is you do need to have some kind of financial stability yourself, to support a downline agent or agency or whatever it may be for a lot of different reasons. Again, not always negative either, for some positive things, to be able to offer certain incentives for a good week or a good day or a good month. Those types of things are cool, and you have to have money to be able to do it.
Yeah, I had way too much coffee this morning and said to myself, let's give away some money, but it's an incentive. Let's give away $25 for every app an agent submits with a particular carrier to try to incentivize them to write that carrier, get comfortable with the process, get out of their comfort zone with a different carrier. But if you need every dollar to buy your own leads, you can't possibly pour that money back into other agents.
Yep, exactly.
What were you thinking? What do you think someone should be aware of? Like, be aware. A bad person to look for, a bad fit for an agency. What should I be aware of when I'm looking for good candidates?
For sure. I mean, a couple, the number one red flag, and this is a tough one to say because it's also some of the best agents I've ever worked with came from this same bucket of people. It's just such a sporadic way to come into the business. People that have failed at a ton of different careers, have tried every job ever, and are coming into this kind of financially strapped. It's hard for me to say that because, again, I was that person. So it's difficult, but also the most inconsistent type of individual ever. It's just you get such a mixed bag of things. And the majority of the time, those are the people that you got to watch out for because they will take, and eventually be gone, and you're going to be paying that roll-up debt. So those people that have no financial security, have failed at 27 different careers that are decent on paper. You got to watch out for those.
Do you feel like sometimes people with little to no overhead, like the people that need to make $252 a month, aren't going to put in the effort necessary when their leads cost $1,000 a month?
Sure. That's another group of people that kind of get difficult because they're like, I'm going to keep overhead as low as possible. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But this business, specifically final expense, like, good luck. If you're not willing to spend, at least $500, $1,000 a week, you're probably not going to be doing it for very long.
Can you explain roll up to whoever's watching this video today and thinking, this is a good video to watch about wanting to build my agency, but I've never heard of roll up before?
Yeah, sure. So let's say you bring on Johnny Agent, your cousin. 13 times removed. You saw him at the family reunion. You told him about it over a couple of drinks, and he's pumped. Well, great. Bring him on. He gets trained up for a couple of days if you're doing your job, and gets 20 leads. Goes out and closes 3 of them. The next week buys 20 leads, closes 4 of them. The next week buys 20 leads, doesn't close any. And you're like, oh, what are you doing, Johnny? Well, Johnny's decided in his head he doesn't want to do this anymore. He just didn't tell you yet, but he's hanging out. The next week he doesn't buy leads. The next week he doesn't buy leads. And eventually you and Johnny don't talk anymore. Well, 3 months from now, that Miss Jones that he wrote that first week cancels her XYZ insurance company policy. 6 months after that, you get 2,700 emails and notices that, oh, there's debt. Mr. Johnny's got debt because of Miss Nancy. Well, guess what? That debt doesn't just disappear because Mr. Johnny didn't respond. It goes to whoever the next upline is. And if that's you, you're now responsible for that. You're going to be paying those commissions out of either your business you write or your overrides that you're getting from other agents and agencies. So the debt doesn't disappear. It's not insurance debt isn't like the American debt where you can just raise the ceiling and just like, oh, that whatever. We'll handle that later. I'm not worried about it. With these companies, they want their money and they get it. Believe me, it's not Fugazi. They collect. And if they don't collect, you go on Vector. And if you go on Vector, you don't get advanced or any new carrier appointments. So vicious cycle, and something that I don't think gets explained to really anybody when they're told about building.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible? I know debt is bad. Tell me about it. Do you think it's possible that sometimes agencies build depth to protect themselves at the top from this kind of roll up?
Sure. I mean, there's most definitely ways in which an agency can protect themselves from this. I mean, layering is important. I've done a pretty good job of that personally, of layering things so that doesn't reach me typically. Layering as well as spread. I mean, having a spread is obviously beneficial, but it's not as beneficial when the debt hits. Because again, there's inevitably going to be roll up at every tier of a hierarchy. That's how this works. So I think layering for me personally has been the number one combatant or tool that's worked the best in keeping that debt away. But again, it's inevitable. It will happen. But finding those red flags up front will help you from having it, balloon too rapidly.
I've heard of agents, I've seen agents, especially some of those social media gurus that are here one day and gone the next, that have been lost to the field of battle from roll up, and they claim they didn't see it coming. I feel like that's not even a possibility unless you aren't logged into your iPad, checking carrier websites, like engaged in your agent production. How can somebody really not see it coming at all?
Yeah, I mean, if especially now, if someone says they didn't see it coming, they just aren't really that in tune with their agency to begin with, because there are signs. You see an agent again, like debt is part of the business. So an agent just stops buying leads for a month or 60 days, or hasn't produced an app in 30 days. Like there's debt coming.
Mm-hmm.
Like the more you do this, the more you're just like, that's a for sure thing. It's not a maybe, or it's not that's not me being negative towards how any certain agent may conduct their business. The best agents have debt, the absolute best. Yeah. So it's one of those things that, because I didn't see it coming. Well, yeah, I guess, like, okay, didn't see it coming. Yeah, it's like, okay, like I get it, but yeah, you did. That's what we do. That's our business. Is 40% of it's debt management, essentially, and just understanding that it's going to inevitably happen and having a plan in place prior to it happening to handle it.
Absolutely. What do you think is another good red flag of an agent that's about to leave you debt? So you're not engaged with what they're doing. They're not writing business. They're not buying leads. Are there any other warning signs I might want to look for to see if I'm looking down the barrel of a big debt?
Well, depending on how kind of in tune with the agency side of your agency you are, one thing that we've seen a lot is repeat names being written, mm-hmm. Meaning Mr. Jones was written with, Prosperity 13 months ago, and then Mr. Jones somehow was written with Colombian this month. That can be a nightmare, because it doesn't look good on paper. Sure. Is the agent going to get paid? Sure they are. But who's to say that Mr. Jones doesn't pass away or get ill or something bad happens? Now we're liable for a chargeback there. So that's one of those things. If you have an agent that's with you that has any kind of, we'll call it longevity, 12 to 18 months in that kind of phase, and you start to see that repeat business, those repeat names it being written, yeah, that can get pretty ugly.
How about the fact that in this business, sometimes an agent doesn't give all their business to one IMO, and that's their discretion, but they have one or two carriers? Does that next tier of person above them, their upline, put themselves at risk for debt because that broker might be hiding from one carrier to go to another, hiding from that debt to write it somewhere else? When they're not getting all of their business, you might be exposed to all of their bad business.
Oh, absolutely. Because you lose line of sight, you lose any kind of consistency, because you might get 2-3 apps a week, and that's great, but you're not seeing the rest of it. You don't know where the business is coming from. It's not even about control. You just don't know. You don't know where the lead program comes from. You don't know any of these very important factors to any kind of longevity. So it is concerning, and it does make things much more difficult.
I've even seen it in-house where I would have pretty good volume of business, but all of a sudden there'd be no business with carrier A for a month. I'm like, wait a second. Then all of a sudden there'd be no business with carrier B for a month. I'm like, are y'all hiding from that carrier? Because I haven't seen anything come through that pipeline in a while. Then I would pull the report. I'm like, oh, okay, they're negative 4,000 across the board. That's probably why.
Yep.
So they can dodge debt with all the business being in-house. If some of the business isn't yours, you don't even see what's taking place on the other side of the fence. Before we go today, we try to keep these videos short so people will watch them in its entirety. So YouTube will give us a good analytical boost. We like to close your videos with the biggest mistake of the week. Either agent, agency, carrier without using a name, probably a bad idea. Life decision, I don't know. What would you say, in your observation, at your level of the industry, was the biggest mistake you observed last week?
Okay, that's a good one. So I was on vacation last week, mentally anyways, just kind of relaxing, and got to look at things from a fun view. So biggest mistake of the week this previous week. Let's see. This is kind of vague, and I hate being vague, but kind of have to be for several reasons. But miscommunication amongst people whom are able to make power decisions, meaning when they make a decision, it can change a pretty large segment of the industry. When the powers that be miscommunicate, it has a really good trickle-down effect for mid-level agencies. For some groups, and other groups it can really harm, because those mid-level agencies rely on those higher powers to communicate and understand how carriers making large changes or products making large, exits can drastically impact large distributions. So miscommunication. So what do we learn from that, right? That's the most important thing. Isn't the mistake, it's what we learn from it. Communicate, whether it's on a small scale with your spouse at home, or a larger scale on, you have an entire agency that needs to know where you're headed and what you're doing. So communication is extremely important, and when it breaks down, it affects everything.
Yeah. I think if we talk about, as we talked about today, I want to build an agency, red flags, green lights, all that in between. Communication is key. If you aren't communicating with those that have trusted to work with you, if they're not communicating with you, there's probably a problem you should be aware of. Thanks for watching today's video. Thumbs up the video if you agreed. Comment below on stuff you might want us to hear. Subscribe to the channel. And as you swipe through the shorts on YouTube, instead of paying attention to driving, you might actually see some of our shorts coming out over YouTube the next couple weeks. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back next time to talk about debt or chargebacks that eventually have become today's conversation in roll-ups. Thanks for watching.